Driverly.com, unlimited drama series.
How does a man react when his own brother laughs and says the locks on his house have been changed? What happens when he stays calm, makes one quiet call, and lets the system answer for him by morning? This is how I learned that respect isn't taken by force. It's enforced by preparation. The key stopped turning halfway. I stood there on my own front porch at 11:47 p.m., suitcase at my feet, staring at a lock I'd never seen before. The brass was too shiny, too new, catching the streetlight like it was mocking me. 3 days away on a client presentation in Denver. 3 days, and my own home had become foreign territory. I tried the key again, slower this time, thinking maybe exhaustion was making me clumsy. Nothing. The deadbolt was different too. A heavy-duty model that looked like it belonged on a bank vault, not a suburban front door. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor across the street. "Everything okay over there?" Her porch light had flicked on, and I could see her silhouette in the window. Great. Now I had an audience for whatever this was. I called Evan's number. It rang 4 times before someone picked up. "Dean?" It wasn't Evan's voice. It was Marlene, his wife, and she sounded amused. "Marlene, my key isn't working. Did something happen to the front door?" A pause, then laughter. Not the kind that invites you to join in, but the kind that lets you know you're the joke. "Oh, that. Yeah, we changed the locks today. We're taking responsibility for the house now, Dean. It's what adults do." The words hit like cold water. "You changed the locks. On my house." "Our house," she corrected, still laughing. "Evan and I talked about it, and we decided it was time to step up. You're always traveling anyway, so we figured, put Evan on the phone. He's busy right now." "Put him on the phone, Marlene?" Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, muffled conversation. Then Evan's voice, distant but audible. Just tell him we'll talk tomorrow." "Did you hear that?" Marlene's voice was back, closer to the phone. "He says you can call tomorrow. We'll figure something out then." I looked at my suitcase, then at my neighbor's porch light, then at the new lock that barred me from my own home. Something cold and clear settled in my chest. Not anger, but something more useful. "I see," I said quietly. "Look, Dean, don't make this dramatic. It's not personal. We're just—" I ended the call. The night was quiet except for the hum of streetlights and the distant sound of a television from somewhere down the block. I picked up my suitcase, walked to my car, and drove to the Hampton Inn on Route 9. At the front desk, I asked for a room with a good Wi-Fi connection. I had work to do. The erosion had been gradual, like water wearing a waystone. Sitting in that hotel room, I traced it back to the beginning, 6 months earlier, when Evan had called me from outside an eviction court. "Dean, I need help, just temporary. Marlene and I were between places right now, and I know you've got that spare room." I'd said yes, because that's what you do for family. Temporary meant a few weeks, maybe a month. Time to get back on their feet. Evan had always been the one who needed rescuing. 3 years younger, perpetually between jobs, with a talent for finding women who made his problems worse. Marlene was the latest in a series of girlfriends who treated my brother like a project and everyone else like an obstacle. The first week, they'd been grateful, helpful even. Marlene had cooked dinner twice and thanked me repeatedly for being so generous. Evan had promised to start looking for work immediately, maybe something in construction like he'd done before. By the second week, grateful had become comfortable. Marlene started rearranging the kitchen to be more efficient. She redirected their mail to my address, just temporarily, until we figure out our next place. She began answering my landline with a cheerful, "Calyx residence," as if she'd lived there for years. I should have said something then. But Evan seemed happy, and I was traveling more for work, and it was easier to let small things slide than to create conflict. By month 2, comfortable had become entitled. Marlene started referring to our house in conversations with neighbors. She planted flowers in the front yard without asking, then got irritated when I didn't thank her for improving the property. She began scheduling repair services and signing for deliveries as if she were the homeowner. Evan went along with everything, the way he always had with strong-willed women. When I tried to talk to him privately about boundaries, he'd shrug and say, You know how Marlene is. She just wants to help. She's good at managing household stuff. The turning point came during my last trip to Denver. I'd called from the airport to let them know my flight was delayed. Don't worry about it, Marlene had said. Evan and I have everything under control here. We're thinking of this as practice for when we have our own place. Practice for what? You know, being responsible homeowners, making decisions about maintenance and security and all that. It's good for Evan to step up, don't you think? There had been something in her tone, a testing quality, like she was probing for weakness. I'd brushed it off, focused on my presentation, told myself I was overthinking things. Now, staring at my laptop screen in a hotel room that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner, I could see the pattern clearly. Every boundary crossed had been presented as help. Every assumption of authority had been framed as responsibility. Every step toward ownership had been disguised as temporary necessity. They hadn't taken my house by force. They'd taken it by making me complicit in my own dispossession, one small compromise at a time. My phone buzzed with a text from Evan. Sorry about tonight. Marlene gets carried away sometimes. Can we talk tomorrow? I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. There would be time for talking later, but not the kind he was expecting. I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it with my home address. Then I began gathering documents. Property deed, purchased solely in my name, April 2019. Mortgage statements, my name only. Homeowner's insurance, my name only. Property tax records, my name only. Utility bills, my account, my payments. Going back 4 years. The paper trail was clean and unambiguous. Whatever games Marlene wanted to play with words like our house and taking responsibility, the law recognized only one owner of 47 Maple Street. My phone rang. Evan again. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, another call. This time, I answered. Dean, come on, pick up. We need to talk about this. I'm listening. Look, I know Marlene came on strong tonight, but you have to understand her perspective. She's trying to build something here, trying to create stability. She thinks you don't take us seriously, like we're just guests who don't have any investment in Evan. My voice was quiet, but he stopped talking. Do you own this house? What? Dean, that's not... It's a simple question. Do you own the house at 47 Maple Street? A pause. You know I don't legally own it, but... Did you pay for the house? No, but... Do you pay the mortgage? Dean, you're being... Do you pay the property taxes, the insurance, the utilities? You know I don't, but that doesn't mean... Then by what right did you change the locks? Silence on the other end. I could hear Marlene in the background, her voice sharp and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. She says, Evan's voice was smaller now, she says possession is 9/10 of the law. I almost laughed. She says that, does she? Dean, don't be like this. We're family. We can work something out. Maybe we can all sit down tomorrow and... Evan, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to say this once, and I'm not going to repeat it. And I'm not going to argue about it. Okay. You have 24 hours to restore my access to my house and remove yourselves from my property. If you don't, I'll have you removed. Dean, come on, don't be... I ended the call and turned off the phone. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt completely calm. No anger, no frustration, no guilt about being unreasonable or making things difficult. Just clarity. I opened my contacts and found Arthur Levin's number. Arthur was a civil attorney I'd worked with on a property dispute for one of my clients 2 years earlier. Thorough, direct, and uninterested in drama. I sent him a text. Need consultation on unlawful exclusion from my own property. Can you see me first thing tomorrow? His response came back within 10 minutes. 9 a.m. Bring ownership docs and timeline of events. I spent the next hour organizing everything into a chronological file. The original invitation for Evan and Marlene to stay temporarily, screenshots of text messages, photos of mail addressed to them at my house, records of their gradual assumption of household authority. By 2 a.m., I had a complete case file. Not because I wanted to destroy my brother, but because I'd learned something important. When people stop respecting your words, you have to let your documentation speak for you. My phone, still turned off, sat silent on the nightstand. I imagined the messages piling up. Evan's apologies and explanations, Marlene's indignation and demands. It didn't matter. I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided not to listen. Arthur Levin's office smelled like leather and old coffee. He listened to my story without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, his expression neutral. Straightforward case, he said when I finished. You're the sole owner. They're guests who've exceeded their welcome and unlawfully excluded you from your property. We can have this resolved quickly. What's the process? First, we document everything. I'll prepare a formal notice of trespass and unlawful exclusion. Then we coordinate with local police for a civil standby. They'll accompany you to regain entry to your property. If your brother and his wife resist, they'll be arrested. Arthur pulled out a form and began filling it out. Any complications I should know about? Criminal history, restraining orders, anything like that? I thought about Marlene's past, the fragments Evan had let slip during unguarded moments. Marlene has some legal issues. Auto theft, I think, from before she met Evan. Charges were dropped, but Arthur looked up. Recent? Within the last 2 years. He made a note. That could be relevant if she escalates this situation. People with pending legal vulnerabilities sometimes make poor decisions when cornered. We spent another hour going over details. Arthur explained the timeline. Formal notice served today, police coordination tomorrow morning, resolution by noon if everything went smoothly. One more thing, Arthur said as I prepared to leave. Your brother will likely try to contact you today. Apologies, promises, maybe threats. Don't engage. Any communication should go through me from now on. From Arthur's office, I drove to Precision Locksmith on Industrial Drive. The owner, a man named Pete, with calloused hands and suspicious eyes, listened to my story with growing interest. So they changed your locks on your own house? That's bold. He shook his head. I've seen this before. Usually it's ex-spouses trying to freeze each other out. But family members? He whistled. That's cold. Pete agreed to document the lock change and provide a written statement about the cost and complexity of the new hardware. Professional-grade deadbolts, he noted. Expensive ones. They weren't planning on this being temporary. Next stop, the police station. Officer Nolan Reeves, a patient man with gray at his temples, explained the civil standby process. We can't force entry without proper documentation, he said. But once we verify ownership, we're required to assist in peaceful re-entry. If the occupants refuse to comply, that becomes criminal trespass. He looked over Arthur's preliminary paperwork. This is clean. Property records are clear. Timeline is documented. We can do this tomorrow morning early. Less chance of neighbors and complications. My last stop was the county records office, where a clerk named Janet pulled up the complete ownership history of my property. Clean title. No liens except my mortgage, no other names on any documents. Sometimes people think living somewhere gives them rights, Janet said, printing out certified copies of the records. But the law is pretty clear about ownership versus occupancy. By 4 p.m., I had a complete legal framework in place. Documentation, professional witnesses, law enforcement coordination, and certified ownership records. Everything Marlene's possession is 9/10 of the law confidence would crumble against. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, showed 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. I scrolled through them without reading the details. Evan's number mostly, with a few from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably Marlene borrowing someone else's phone. The messages followed a predictable pattern. Confusion, then anger, then bargaining, then threats. I deleted them all without responding. Arthur called at 6 p.m. Notice has been served. Your brother signed for it personally. We're set for tomorrow at 7 a.m. How did he react? Quietly. His wife was less quiet. She wanted to know who you thought you were. Bringing lawyers into a family matter? Arthur's tone was dry. I explained that changing locks on someone else's property had already brought lawyers into it. I spent that evening in the hotel restaurant, eating a decent steak and reviewing my case file one more time. Everything was in order. Tomorrow, the system would wake up and restore what words and family loyalty had failed to protect. At 9 p.m., my phone rang one more time. Evan's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Dean. His voice was different, smaller, defeated. We need to talk. We tried talking, Evan. You chose to let Marlene change my locks instead. I know. But maybe
I cheated on you with your brother. What's wrong?
I will not forgive you for this!
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
we can work something out. Maybe there's a compromise here. The compromise was letting you stay in my house for 6 months. You responded by locking me out of it. Marlene thinks... I don't care what Marlene thinks, Evan. I care what the law thinks, and the law thinks you're trespassing. A long pause. You're really going to have your own brother arrested? I'm going to reclaim my house. What happens to you depends on how you respond to that. I hung up and turned off the phone again. Tomorrow would be complicated enough without spending the night listening to promises that should have been kept 6 months ago. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. No anxiety about what I might find changed in my house when I got home. No wondering what new boundary would be crossed while I was away. Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that by morning, the situation would be resolved. At 6 a.m., I met Arthur in the parking lot of a diner 2 blocks from my house. Officer Reeves was already there, along with a second officer I didn't recognize. Standard procedure, Reeves explained. 2 officers for civil standby, in case things get complicated. Arthur handed me a folder with all the documentation we'd prepared. This should be straightforward, but if they refuse to acknowledge your ownership or resist leaving, don't argue. Let us handle it. We drove separately to Maple Street. It was barely light, the neighborhood quiet except for a few early commuters backing out of driveways. I parked across the street from my house and waited for the police cruiser to pull up behind me. The house looked the same from the outside, but somehow foreign. Marlene's flowers in the front bed, a welcome mat I'd never seen before, curtains in the front window that weren't mine. 6 months of small changes that had transformed my home into their territory. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Marlene. We can work this out. Don't do something you'll regret. I showed the message to Arthur. He shook his head. Desperation. She knows what's coming. Another text from Evan's number this time. Dean, please. I'm your brother. We're family. Don't destroy us over this. I turned off the phone and put it in my pocket. Officer Reeves approached my car window. Ready? I nodded and got out. The morning air was cool and clean, carrying the smell of dew and someone's coffee brewing. Normal suburban morning sounds. A dog barking somewhere, the distant hum of highway traffic, a lawnmower starting up 3 blocks away. Arthur fell into step beside me as we walked toward the front door. Remember, he said quietly, you're not asking permission to enter your own home. You're informing them that you're entering it. The new lock gleamed in the morning light, still mocking me with its shiny brass finish. But this time, I wasn't alone on the porch, with a useless key and wounded pride. This time, I had documentation, witnesses, and the law on my side. Officer Reeves knocked on the door. 3 sharp official knocks that echoed through the quiet street. Police, open the door, please. I could hear movement inside, voices, the sound of footsteps on hardwood floors. My hardwood floors, in my house, where I was about to reclaim what had always been mine. The door opened and Evan stood there in pajama pants and a t-shirt, looking like he hadn't slept. Behind him, I could see Marlene in the hallway, fully dressed, her arms crossed and her expression defiant. "Good morning, sir," Officer Reeves said. "We're here to assist Mr. Calix in regaining entry to his property. Do you have identification?" Evan looked at me, then at Arthur, then back at the officer. Yes, I have ID. But this is my brother's house. We live here." "Sir, we need to see your identification and any documentation showing your legal right to occupy this property." That's when I saw Marlene's confidence finally crack. Just a little, around the edges, but enough to know she understood that possession wasn't 9/10 of anything when the real owner showed up with proper documentation. The next 20 minutes unfolded with the methodical precision of a system that had handled this exact situation countless times before. Officer Reeves examined Evan's ID, then asked for any lease agreement, rental contract, or ownership documents that would give him legal right to occupy the property. Evan had none. Arthur presented the ownership records, property deed, and mortgage documentation. Everything clean, everything official, everything bearing my name alone. "Mr. Calix," Officer Reeves said, addressing me, "these documents confirm your ownership of this property. You have the right to enter your home." Marlene stepped forward from the hallway. "This is harassment. We've been living here for months. We have rights." The second officer, whose nameplate read Martinez, looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation showing legal right to occupy this property?" "I don't need documentation. We're family." "Family relationship doesn't establish property rights," Martinez replied. "Do you have a lease agreement or rental contract?" Marlene's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. Dean, tell them we had an agreement." I looked at her steadily. "We had an agreement for temporary housing assistance. You responded by changing my locks and excluding me from my own property." "That's not how it happened." Arthur stepped forward with his legal pad. "Ma'am, are you denying that you changed the locks on this property without the owner's permission?" We were taking responsibility for—" "Yes or no, please. Did you change the locks?" Marlene's defiance cracked a little more. "We were trying to secure the property." "From the owner?" Arthur's tone was neutral, professional. "You were securing the property from the person who owns it?" That's when Evan finally spoke up. "Marlene, stop. Just stop." He looked at me with something that might have been regret. "Dean, I'm sorry. This got out of hand. We never meant for it to go this far." "But it did go this far," I replied quietly. "And now, it has to be resolved." Officer Reeves took charge again. "Mr. Calix has the right to enter his property. You have 15 minutes to gather essential personal items. Any belongings left behind can be retrieved later by appointment." 15 minutes? Marlene's voice was sharp. "We've been living here for months. We have things, we have—" "Ma'am, you're occupying this property without legal right. 15 minutes is a courtesy." That's when Martinez's radio crackled with an incoming message. He stepped aside to respond, then returned with a different expression on his face. "Ma'am, what's your full name? Why do you need my name? Please state your full name for identification purposes." Marlene looked around, at Evan, at me, at Arthur, as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. "Marlene Catherine Walsh." Martinez nodded and spoke into his radio. The response was brief but apparently significant, because his posture shifted from civil assistance to law enforcement. "Ma'am, please step outside. We need to speak with you privately." "About what?" "There's an outstanding warrant for your arrest. Auto theft, failure to appear." The color drained from Marlene's face. All her confidence, all her talk about possession and rights and taking responsibility evaporated in an instant. That was dismissed. Those charges were dropped. "No, ma'am, they weren't. You failed to appear for a hearing last month. Please step outside." What followed was swift and professional. Marlene was handcuffed and placed in the back of the police cruiser. Evan stood in the doorway, watching his wife disappear behind tinted windows, looking lost and confused. "Evan," Officer Reeves said gently, "you still need to gather your things and vacate the property." My brother nodded slowly, like a man waking up from a long dream. "Dean, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything right now," I replied. "Just get your things." Arthur handed Evan a business card. There are resources available for people in your situation: housing assistance, job placement services. The court will likely require you to attend a support program as part of resolving this matter. Evan took the card without looking at it. What's going to happen to Marlene? That depends on her legal situation and how she handles it, Arthur said. But that's not your responsibility right now. Your responsibility is finding stable housing and employment. While Evan packed, I walked through my house for the first time in 3 days. It looked different. Not just the small changes Marlene had made, but the feeling of it. It felt like a place where other people had been making decisions, assuming authority, treating my property as their domain. But it was still my house. The mortgage was still in my name. The deed was still clear. And the law had just confirmed what I'd known all along. Ownership isn't something you lose by being generous, and it isn't something others gain by being presumptuous. Evan emerged from the spare room with 2 suitcases and a garbage bag full of clothes. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the collapse of whatever fantasy he and Marlene had constructed about their life in my house. Dean, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I really am sorry. I looked at my brother. Unemployed, homeless, watching his wife get arrested, finally facing the consequences of months of poor decisions. I know you are, Evan. But sorry doesn't change Locke's back, and it doesn't rebuild trust. He nodded and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. What happens now? Now you figure out how to take care of yourself without taking from other people. After everyone left, I stood in my living room as the morning sun streamed through windows that were mine again, in a house that was mine again, with locks that would be changed back to keys that were mine. I set my house key on the coffee table and looked around. It would take time to undo all the small changes, to make the space feel completely mine again. But for the first time in months, I was home. Not because I'd fought for it or argued for it or begged for it, but because I'd prepared for it, documented it, and let the system enforce what my words couldn't protect. The silence was perfect. Paul Whitaker's office smelled like vanilla candles and had motivational posters that might have been ironic but probably weren't. I sat in a circle of folding chairs with 7 other people, listening to a man named Gary talk about his gambling addiction and his ex-wife's restraining order. I wasn't there for me. I was there because the court had ordered Evan to attend these sessions, and after 3 months of missed appointments and excuses, I'd volunteered to drive him, not to enable him, not to rescue him, but to support the one thing that might actually help him learn to function as an adult. Evan, Paul said when Gary finished, how are you doing with the housing situation? My brother looked better than he had 6 months ago. Thinner, but healthier. Working construction again. Living in a studio apartment he could barely afford. Taking the bus because his license was suspended after Marlene's legal troubles had somehow entangled his car registration. It's okay, Evan said. Hard, but okay. I got my first month's rent saved up for a better place. And how are you feeling about the situation with your brother? Evan glanced at me, then back at Paul. Grateful, I guess, and ashamed, but mostly grateful. Grateful for what? For him not letting me keep screwing up. For stopping me before I did something I couldn't come back from. Paul nodded. Dean, how do you feel about that? I thought about it for a moment. I feel like I learned the difference between helping someone and enabling them. Helping someone means setting boundaries that protect both of you. Enabling them means letting them destroy themselves while they take you down with them. And the relationship now? We're rebuilding it. Slowly. With boundaries. After the session, Evan and I went to a diner near his apartment. He ordered coffee and a sandwich he could afford. I ordered coffee and listened. Marlene calls me sometimes, he said, from county lockup. Wants me to put money on her commissary account. Are you going to? No. He stirred sugar into his coffee. I can't afford to, and even if I could. Paul says I need to stop trying to save people who don't want to be saved. I nodded. How do you feel about that? Lonely, mostly. But also, free? Like I don't have to be responsible for everyone else's mistakes anymore. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, 2 brothers who had learned different lessons from the same disaster. Dean, Evan said finally, I know this doesn't fix what happened, but I need you to know something. What's that? When you had me removed from the house, when you let the system handle it instead of just fighting with me. That was the first time anyone ever treated me like my actions had real consequences. He looked out the window at the bus stop where he'd wait for the 4:15 back to his studio apartment. I hated you for it at first, but it was also the first time I realized that someone cared enough about me to not let me keep destroying myself. I thought about that night 6 months ago, standing on my own porch with a key that wouldn't work, choosing preparation over confrontation, documentation over drama. I didn't do it to teach you a lesson, Evan. I did it to protect what was mine. I know, but it taught me one anyway. The bus arrived on schedule. Evan gathered up his jacket and the leftovers he'd asked them to box up for dinner. Same time next week, he asked. Same time next week. I watched him board the bus, pay his fare with exact change, and find a seat by the window. He waved as they pulled away, and I waved back. Then I drove home to my house, with my keys, where my locks kept out the people who didn't belong and welcomed in the people who did, where boundaries were respected because they were enforced, and where help was offered without enabling destruction. The silence was still perfect, but now it had room in it for the possibility of trust, earned back slowly, one conversation at a time. Some locks, I'd learned, were worth changing. Others were worth changing back. The difference was knowing which was which, and having the courage to act on that knowledge when words weren't enough.